Asterisk cold open, no music, silence. Then a low ambient hum. His name was Marcus, 43 years old. Former logistics manager. He had studied collapse. Read every book. Watched every video. Stocked 12 months of food, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, a medical kit that would make a field surgeon envious. When the grid went down across the eastern seaboard in the winter of 2031, in this hypothetical, Marcus was ready. He survived the first week with precision. He survived the second with discipline. He died in the third. Not from a gunshot. Not from starvation. Not from raiders breaking down his door. He died because he needed insulin. And he had not thought to stockpile it. And the only man within 12 miles who still had a refrigerated supply wouldn't trade it for ammunition, or for food, or for anything Marcus had prepared. He had what that man needed. That man simply didn't need what Marcus had. Marcus died because he misunderstood the most fundamental force that emerges after collapse. It wasn't violence. It wasn't scarcity alone. It was economics. I've spent years studying what actually happens when societies come apart. I've gone through the first-hand accounts, the academic postmortems, the survivor testimonies from Sarajevo, from Buenos Aires, from the villages outside Damascus, from the frozen apartment blocks of post-Soviet Russia. People in this community call me a trash panda. I'll take that name, because that's what I am. I move through the wreckage of collapsed systems. I root through the overlooked corners. I find value where others see only waste. I watch in the dark quietly while the overconfident and the underprepared stumble past me. And what I've learned is this: the hidden economy that emerges after collapse is not what you've been told to expect. Today, I'm going to show you 7 truths about that economy. And by the end, you will understand why most preppers, including some of the most serious ones, are preparing for the wrong collapse entirely. Stay with me through all 7. The last one is the one that disturbs me most. Truth number 7. The first currency is not gold. Let me take you to Argentina. 2001. The peso collapsed virtually overnight. Banks froze accounts. The middle class, people who had jobs, mortgages, retirement accounts, woke up one morning and found that their money had been stolen by the mathematics of hyperinflation. The survivalist community will tell you, this is why you hold gold. This is why you hold silver. Hard assets. Real money. Here's what actually happened in Argentina. Gold was nearly useless in the first weeks. Not because it lacked value in theory, but because the person selling bread didn't have a scale to weigh it, didn't know how to verify its purity, and didn't trust you anyway. What circulated first? What passed hand to hand like oxygen? Was cigarettes, alcohol, over-the-counter medication, cooking oil. Not because people are primitive, but because trust hadn't yet been established. And in the absence of trust, currency has to be its own verification. A bottle of cooking oil is self-evident. You can see it, smell it, test it in your hand. A gold coin requires a relationship, and relationships take time. The lesson: in the first phase of collapse, consumable commodities with immediate, verifiable utility outperform precious metals every time. Stock what people need today, not what economists say should matter in theory. The trash panda doesn't carry a gold coin in the first week. He carries cooking oil, aspirin, and tobacco, whether he smokes or not. Truth number 6. Skills have a shelf life. Consider what happened to surgeons in the Siege of Sarajevo. From 1992 to 1996, Sarajevo was encircled, shelled daily. Civilians were shot by snipers walking to collect water. The city's infrastructure was systematically destroyed. Surgeons inside that city became some of the most valuable human beings alive, not because surgery was new, but because the specific trauma surgery required during an active siege, operating without electricity, improvising anesthesia, managing infection without antibiotics, was a skill almost no one had. The surgeons who had spent decades doing elective procedures in clean hospitals were less useful than the ones who had done humanitarian work in difficult conditions. Skills have a shelf life because collapse changes what skills mean. A stockbroker's skills expire on day 1. A mechanic's skills transform. Suddenly, the ability to repair a carburetor from a 1978 engine becomes deeply valuable because those engines don't require computer diagnostics. A dentist becomes a feudal lord. Not because of their surgery skills primarily, but because dental pain is the kind of suffering that makes grown men beg. Think about your skill set honestly. Not what you can do in a functioning world. What can you do in a broken one? And more specifically, what can you do that no one else within walking distance can do? That gap between your capability and your community's need is your true net worth in the hidden economy. Truth number 5. Information is the most dangerous currency. When the Soviet Union dissolved, not in a single dramatic moment, but across years of slow institutional rot from 1989 to 1991, what separated the people who accumulated wealth from those who lost everything was not resources, not physical preparedness. It was access to information before others had it. The people who knew 6 months early that certain state industries were about to be privatized, they positioned themselves to acquire those assets for nearly nothing. The people who understood how hyperinflation would move through the ruble economy, before it became visible to the average citizen, they moved their holdings in time. Information asymmetry is the most powerful economic force in any environment. And it becomes exponentially more powerful in collapse, because official information channels disintegrate. In a collapse scenario, this plays out at a neighborhood level, not a national one. The person who knows 2 hours before everyone else that a supply convoy is passing through the Eastern Road. The person who knows which hospital still has medication. The person who knows which family quietly left town and abandoned a property with resources inside. That person doesn't need to be physically strong, doesn't need to be heavily armed, doesn't need a bunker. They need a network. And they need to have built it before it was needed. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The most valuable thing you can build right now is not a pantry. It's a web of relationships with people who see different slices of the world than you do. The trash panda doesn't hoard information. He trades it. And in that trade, he stays fed, stays connected, stays alive. Truth number 4. The moral economy emerges faster than the market economy. This one surprises people. When Hurricane Katrina drowned New Orleans in 2005, the media narrative was rapid and brutal. Looting, violence, breakdown of civilization. And yes, those things happened. The failure of governmental response is well documented and unforgivable. But here is what the cameras didn't linger on. Within the first 48 hours of the flooding, informal mutual aid networks had already formed in neighborhoods where people knew each other. People sharing boats. People pulling strangers from rooftops without being asked. People organizing food distribution with remarkable efficiency, not because a government mandated it, but because humans in crisis default toward cooperation when they share identity with those around them. The moral economy, the informal system of obligation, reciprocity, and social credit, activates faster than any market system. What does this mean practically? It means that the neighbor you've been cold toward for 3 years will remember it. It means the family you helped when their pipes burst last winter will show up for you in ways you cannot calculate. It means that reputation in a post-collapse environment is not a soft concept. It is a hard asset. Here is the psychological dimension that most analysts ignore. People in collapse revert to tribal accounting. They track debts and favors with astonishing precision. The anthropological literature on hunter-gatherer societies is clear on this. Humans are exquisitely calibrated to monitor reciprocity within small groups. You don't need to be the strongest person in your community. You need to be the person people feel they owe. Build that ledger now, quietly, consistently, without expectation of immediate return. The trash panda moves through a neighborhood, leaves small things behind, and when darkness falls, finds that doors are quietly left unlocked for him. Truth number 3. Medical knowledge is the highest value commodity that isn't controlled. Let me take you to northern Syria. 2013. The city of Raqqa had become a front line. Supply chains for medication had been severed. International medical aid was intermittent and insufficient. In communities where conventional medical access had collapsed, something emerged that has been documented repeatedly in conflict zones throughout history. The person with medical knowledge, even partial, even imperfect, became a central node around which the community organized, not just because they could treat injuries, but because illness and injury create desperation faster than hunger. Hunger arrives slowly, pain arrives instantly. And a person in acute pain, or watching their child in acute pain, will trade everything they have for relief. Here is the dangerous truth about this. It creates a moral hazard that history shows is almost impossible to resist. In the Bosnian conflict, accounts from Sarajevo describe doctors who began slowly, reluctantly, then habitually, pricing their services in a way that would have been unconscionable before the war. Not all of them. Many remained heroic and selfless. but the economic pressure that medical knowledge created on its holder was immense. I'm not here to moralize about what people do in impossible circumstances. I'm here to tell you what happens. So here's the practical survival instruction underneath this truth. Learn stop the bleed. Learn wound packing and tourniquet application. Learn to recognize signs of infection and sepsis. Learn which over-the-counter medications can serve emergency functions beyond their labeled purpose. You do not need to be a physician to hold extraordinary value in a medical economy. You need to know enough to be the first person someone calls. And that first call person, in every collapse community documented by researchers, occupies a position of social centrality that translates directly into protection, resources, and survival. Truth number 2. The shadow economy begins before the official economy ends. This is the one that keeps me up at night. Because it means that the hidden economy after collapse is not a future event. It is already forming. Look at what happened in Venezuela across the 2010s as the Bolivarian economy deteriorated. Years before most international observers declared a crisis, a shadow economy had already fully formed inside the country. Black markets for dollars. Informal networks for medication. Barter circles for food. These were not emergency improvisations. They were mature, organized, parallel systems that had been developing for years as people who were paying attention slowly stopped trusting official channels. The people who built positions within those shadow networks before the official collapse? They were wealthy by the standards of what came after. The people who refused to engage, either out of principle or denial, or simple unawareness, found themselves on the outside of functioning economic networks precisely when they needed them most. Now I'm not telling you to break laws or engage in black markets in your current environment. I'm telling you something more subtle and more important. The collapse doesn't arrive on a single morning. It arrives across months and years, gradually and then suddenly. And by the time the sudden part happens, the informal economy that will govern survival has already chosen its participants. What this means for you right now. The skills you build now are your application for membership in that future economy. The relationships you cultivate now are your credentials. The reputation you establish as someone reliable, resourceful, and trustworthy is your initial capital. The trash panda doesn't wait for collapse to start learning how to survive in it. The trash panda has already been living at the edge of the formal world long enough to know exactly where the gaps are. Truth number 1. The one I held for last. Loyalty is the scarcest resource in a collapsed economy. And it is the one that gets people killed. I need you to listen carefully here, because this is not what it sounds like. During the Siege of Sarajevo, researchers who interviewed survivors afterward documented a pattern that appears in virtually every long-term collapse scenario studied. It is a pattern about groups, about tribes, about the communities people form for mutual protection. Here it is. In the early phases of collapse, people cooperate out of genuine solidarity. The moral economy activates, as we discussed. People help each other. Groups form. Bonds deepen. And then, somewhere between month 3 and month 6, the timeline shifts depending on severity. The economics of the group begin to change. Resources become genuinely scarce. Not uncomfortably scarce, existentially scarce. And at that point, every member of the group becomes simultaneously an asset and a liability. The elderly person who cannot contribute labor. The infant who consumes resources. The person with a chronic illness requiring ongoing medication. The injured member who requires care. History, and I'm speaking now of documented historical accounts from collapses including the Soviet siege of Leningrad, the long-term displacement camps of the Syrian conflict, and the social dynamics studied in post-Katrina communities. History shows that groups begin to make calculations about these members. Not openly, not in formal votes, but in small decisions. In the rationing of attention. In the quiet reduction of shared resources. In the social costs imposed on those who advocate too loudly for the vulnerable. This is the most psychologically disturbing finding in the collapse literature. Not that people become monsters. They don't, mostly. But that ordinary, decent people, people who would describe themselves as loyal, as principled, as moral, begin making utilitarian calculations about human lives when sufficiently pressured by scarcity. And the people most at risk are not the weakest physical members of the group. The people most at risk are the ones who advocate for them. Because advocacy is expensive. And expense is not tolerated past a certain point. The dangerous survival rule I promised you. Know which version of yourself appears when the cost of loyalty exceeds its immediate return. Not because you should abandon loyalty, but because you must understand the pressure that will come for it. The person who enters a collapse with a romantic idea of group solidarity and brotherhood, without having honestly examined the economics of that solidarity, that person is not prepared. They are not prepared because they are trusting a version of human nature that only exists when the pressure is low. The trash panda sees this clearly, not because he is cynical, but because he is honest. He has read the accounts. He has studied the arc. He knows what the third month looks like, and the 6th, and the 12th. And he makes his decisions accordingly, with clear eyes, with full knowledge of what the darkness brings out in people who thought they knew themselves. Asterisk, pause, breath, tone drops lower, 7 truths. The first currency is consumable, not precious. Skills transform in ways you cannot fully anticipate. Information asymmetry is power, and it must be built now. The moral economy activates fast, and it has memory. Medical knowledge occupies a position no other skill can touch. The shadow economy is already forming around you right now. And loyalty, the most human thing we have, is also the most economically fragile. Most people think collapse is a sudden event, a moment, a morning they will recognize and respond to. It is not. It is a process. A long, gradual, then terrifyingly rapid dissolution of the systems that make ordinary life feel permanent. And the hidden economy that emerges in that process does not wait for you to be ready. It does not hold a spot for you because you have good intentions, or a full pantry, or a clean conscience. It rewards positioning. It rewards relationships. It rewards the quiet, patient, resourceful observer who has been paying attention since long before the lights went out.